listening to the Charles Aris podcast, The DNA of Agricultural Sales. In this episode, Charles Aris Senior Associate Practice Leader Kacey Toews sits down with David Dam, founder of All Terrain, to discuss the realities of agricultural sales today. Together, they explore what makes ag sales uniquely complex, the shift from relationship-only selling to a more consultative approach, and the key traits that define world-class sales talent. They also cover coaching strategies, onboarding best practices, and the real cost of poor succession planning in today's market. Let's dive in.
Hello and welcome back. My name is Kacey Toews, a Senior Associate Practice Leader within the Agriculture Practice here at Charles Aris, and we are back for another exciting episode. And today I'm really excited about the guest with us, David Dam. We will be discussing all things agriculture sales. So thanks for joining us today, David.
Good to be with you.
Absolutely. So, David, to kick it off, I'd love for you to share kind of a brief intro and background on yourself for our audience.
Well, I'm from the state of Nebraska and have grew up on a farm. And I went to the University of Nebraska and studied ag education, and that's where I really got my passion about teaching. And from there, spent nearly 24 years in agriculture businesses, both selling and leading organizations. And then 11 years ago, we started our company, All Terrain, where we invest in organizations that are wanting to take their company to another level, both with leaders and sales execution. And so we primarily work in the agriculture industry.
That's awesome. I love that. So, what drew you to helping? I mean, I know you have a background in it from an education standpoint, but what really drew you to build this business specifically with around sales teams?
I thought about it a lot when we started the company, Kacey, and I think there's a gap today in regards to how agriculture businesses are reaching customers, and there is an absolute gap in regards to the skills that organizations are having to build within their teams. And so helping agriculture reach farmers in a more effective and efficient way is really our passion is. Especially me growing up on a farm, the smells, the time of the year, the seasons, those things don't leave you. And so we wanted to give back to agriculture, and this is our way of doing it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. One of the verticals or the functions I work within are definitely sales and marketing roles. So I've had a lot of experience talking to ag sales folks across the country. And it's so interesting because, you think sales are sales, but ag sales are completely different from other B2B industries. So I'd love to hear, just from your perspective, what separates ag sales from different industries and also misconceptions people have.
Agriculture sales are some of the most complex sales of any industry in the United States. Because how farming and livestock works, there's generally multiple closings. So the more multiple closing dates that you have, the more complex the sales is. You really think about that. If you're in life insurance sales, you really have one close. And in agriculture, you're closing seed at one point in the time, fertilizer, crop nutrition, precision, and crop protection at different times during the year. So the more times you have to close an individual sale, the more complex it is. The second thing, and I think your listeners will likely nod their head to this, the more SKUs that you have to represent, the more product lines that you have to represent, Kacey, the more complex the sales process is, because the knowledge that person has to have is vast. And it's just a huge barrier for many organizations because of the SKUs that they have to manage. And then the third thing that makes agriculture sales is if you sell a commodity. So if differentiation is difficult within your product line and you're selling like products, then the number one differentiator has to be the salesperson.
Yep.
And then the fourth thing that makes ag sales complex is we're not selling a bottle of water for $1. These are large investments that many farmers and businesses are having to invest in. And so the larger the sale, the harder it is to sell. So those four issues make it extremely difficult and complex for an average organization selling direct to farmers.
I'd love to hear your perspective just on why, trust and credibility also matter so much in this space, because I think that's huge.
I think many organizations, the misconception is if you just build relationships with people and if they're your friend, they'll buy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you certainly need to be liked. I mean, very few people write out a check to somebody they don't like. And so you do need to be liked. But today, farmers and ag businesses want to work with somebody that's respected. And so I think the misconception is if I'm everybody's friend, they'll buy from me. And they couldn't be further from the truth in regards to how farmers have adjusted in regards to their buying habits. 2 decades ago, relationship selling was the number one, what I would call target for most organizations. Just build a relationship with a farmer and you'll sell them. And today that has shifted dramatically to a business segment, that farmers and businesses are wanting somebody that's going to help them go to the next level. And so that's a huge deal that I think a lot of organizations need to shift to and from.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously you have great expertise and a lot of, years of experience training and meeting with salespersons. So I would love to just hear from you. If you could create the DNA of a great salesperson in ag, what would it look like? What are all those qualities that they need to have?
It's a big question, and we've studied it now for over a decade in regards to that sales DNA. And we all have sales DNA in us. It's the space between the ears that impact the ability to reach a customer. And the one that if you're listening to this podcast, you may want to pick up your pencil is resiliency. Resiliency is the ability to perform under pressure. And we're finding today that a lot of organizations, when either they're adding to their sales force or replacing, there's a short period of time that it takes. You really need somebody to get up to speed and begin to impact the bottom line positively, Kacey.
Mhm.
And this is last year, over 30% of the salespeople that were placed, we have heard and learned that nearly a third of them did not meet quota and thus either left on their own because they weren't successful or they felt that pressure from their sales manager. So resiliency is big. I also would add that the adversity that many producers in agriculture are facing today, the same thing mirrors into the sales force. And so resiliency is, how do you focus on the client and his or her needs? And so that is added to my definition of resiliency. And then how quickly you're able to recover from defeat or a no. And a lot of salespeople waste a lot of time being the victim, the pity party.
Right.
So I would look, if I'm a sales manager in an organization right now, resiliency would be at the top. Taking it to another step in regards to DNA, Kacey, one of the biggest issues that organizations have in regards to the headspace between the ears of salespeople is their supporting buying cycle. And let me define that for you. How you buy as a person, as a customer, is how you'll sell. So if you take a lot of time to shop around for the best price, you can't make a decision. When you're selling and the customer is having a hard time making a decision or pushing you off, the salesperson will go, well, I do the same thing. Yeah, I can come back in a few weeks. And the problem with that is every 3 days that go past when a customer could have made his or her decision, you have a 10% less chance of winning the sale.
Yeah.
Just think about what I just said. And so supporting buying cycle is a part of the DNA that I think a lot of organizations right now, as they listen to this podcast, are probably nodding their head and go, I think we got that issue. The third piece of DNA, and this one's a big one. Do you have a higher need to be liked or respected by your customer? So back to what we said before, that a lot of organizations, they primarily sell on relationships. If they're my friend, they'll buy. I always ask salespeople, if that's the case, why don't you sell everybody? And they go, yeah, well, I guess you're right. And so if you have a higher need to be liked and respected, you'll have a hard time challenging the farmer or the customer. And you'll have a hard time pushing back when they say, well, that's too high a price, or I don't think I need that, they'll just agree. And the customer then sees you as a salesperson and not as a consultant. So those are a number of issues that we see in the sales DNA that are really missing in a part of many organizations today, Kacey.
Yeah, those are some really great points. And to your point on relationship only selling and just your experience there, I've definitely noticed a shift with some of our clients where they're definitely looking for someone who can bring in a more consultative, data-driven selling approach to, drive the team or build a team. So, have organizations from your point of view really struggled with this shift? Are there some that are, doing it really well, not doing it? Where do you think the industry as a whole is right now in making this shift from relationship only to consultative?
Well, our research, and we do a lot of assessment work in this space. And so we've assessed, over 300 agriculture companies in the last 11 years in their sales force. And well over 88% of the sales forces we assess today are relationship sellers. So they
Wow.
have not moved to the consultative approach. And let me just define what we see as the consultative approach. It's your ability to ask really great questions that uncover needs of the customer. And
Mhm.
that isn't new, but we find that the average sales force, get this, the average sales force on a sales call asks less than 4 questions to their customer when they're with them. That's not enough to really
Right.
uncover a compelling need that the customer needs. And so this is an absolute necessity today for organizations to shift from relationship selling to a consultative approach where you're finding out the true needs of the customer beyond the transparent price tag of your product.
I think when you think about our industry as a whole, you're never going to really fully move away from relationship based or relationship only selling. I think you have to establish that first, but then there is a time, you need to move into kind of that more consultative approach and like you shared, be able to push back on a customer if needed. But you have to kind of gain that respect first. So that's a really, really interesting point. What are some of the companies doing to implement more of this consultative approach?
We've never been so busy, and we kind of expected this. Anytime you have a downshift in the ag economy, it generally impacts revenue, and it certainly
Hmm.
has with a lot of clients that we serve across the United States. And so they're reaching out and they're asking, what can we do right now to impact sales? And there's a couple things that I would encourage the listeners to possibly think about. If you have if you're in feed or you're in seed or crop protection, crop nutrition, that product that you're supplying to the market, whether it be in a plant or in a field, there is a process that I'm sure you go through operationally to make sure that that product hits standards. There are steps. And yet in our sales forces, if you asked a salesperson or a manager to write down the steps, the specific steps or the customer journey that their sales force is taking customers through, it gets really quiet in rooms. We don't really know. So the first thing I would advise organizations today is to sit down with a sales expert or their sales management group and write down the specific steps in the customer journey. Because if you don't know them, your sales force doesn't, and it probably is impacting your revenue. Then the second thing that I would encourage customers or clients of yours to really begin to consider right now is making sure that their leaders, their managers, their coaches are out in the field. I really believe the answer is in the field, and the field is likely, in a pickup truck or out in the field with growers. And I think there's our studies would show that the highest percent of coaching is on demand, meaning if you need
Oh,
anything, let me know.
yeah.
Over 40% of the sales forces that we assess, that is the number one type of coaching that's delivered. If you need anything, let me know. Just think about that.
Yeah.
And if you're struggling and you're not hitting quota, you probably don't want to call your boss up and say, I'm struggling. You want to hide it from them.
Right.
And so tactical coaching is the best form of coaching you'll ever deliver. And what is tactical coaching? It is specific to accounts, and it's taking that customer journey that I explained that is important before, and working through that process with each salesperson that you have in the field. And you're going to find that your win rates go up. It won't be instant, but you're going to find
Sure.
that confidence is going to grow. And once the confidence grows, the results will come with it.
That's awesome. That's great. I want to pivot to discussing a topic I know we're both very passionate about, and that's hiring and developing sales talent in this industry. So, what advice would you have for some younger professionals trying to break into ag sales?
There is a lot of people that have what I would call desire to do well. And we actually assess it in our assessments, and we assess your desire. And most people, they have a strong desire to be successful. The difference maker between average salespeople and world-class salespeople, Kacey, is one thing: commitment. And commitment is your willingness to do what it takes ethically to get the job done. And so work on your commitment, not just by words, but your actions. That'll help you a lot. And then the second thing I think that a lot of employers are really seeking right now, they're absolutely seeking it. And that is that ability to have great trust. And, trust is something, 20 years ago, we really didn't talk about it. You really didn't have to teach it. And I think society today, you look around and it's just hard to trust people from what we see in the news and maybe actions in our local communities. But The Speed of Trust, that's a book I highly recommend that your listeners grab a hold of. And there are 13 very specific behaviors that are in us or we can show that demonstrate trust. And I think when you demonstrate trust, employers absolutely will grab onto you and invest in you. And so those are really two specific things, Kacey. Commitment and trust would be two things that if you're trying to break in, really examine yourself and see where you might fit in those two areas.
Yeah, they sound so simple, but really there's a lot of depth there, and it takes time to develop some of those things too, for sure. And just in your experience, do you find that great salespeople are developed, or do they need to be hired that way, or does it depend on the situation?
We're all given talent, and we find that world-class salespeople, it's a lot of why they become great salespeople is they're coachable. And so they're great listeners, and they're world-class in this area. And this is really important. In sales, when you lose a sale, you're going to blame it on one of four things. So get ready for this. You'll blame it either on the economy, meaning I lost the sale because our price was too high. They didn't have the budget. That's why I lost the sale. The second thing most salespeople will blame it on is the competition. They had a better program. They had better products. And so I tell my manager I lost because of competition. The third thing average salespeople blame a loss of sales on, Kacey, is they blame their boss or their own company. Yeah. When I first saw that, I almost lost my breath. And we find that nearly 20% of salespeople today are internal terrorists within their organizations. I posted a link on LinkedIn today that you've maybe heard about it, where one bad apple will ruin the entire bunch.
Yep.
And we find that nearly 20% of ag salespeople today will ruin the bunch.
Yeah.
And so the best world-class salespeople, Kacey, they don't blame those three things. What they do when they potentially lose a sale is they point at themselves and ask, what step did I miss? So that world-class salespeople are extremely responsible to themselves and their organization. They're hard to find, but when you find them, you just have this big smile on your face because you're so proud of them in regards to how they interact with people and how they interact with their teammates.
Absolutely. And I think it's all about feedback too. You have to be
Yeah.
willing to ask for feedback, and then how you respond to feedback tells a lot. And, constantly asking for that feedback to get better. I think that's really important, not just in ag sales, but honestly, any position throughout life. So I think that's another strong point. I know another area you're passionate about is onboarding. So, what advice would you give to companies to develop a successful onboarding program?
Very few organizations really have a great specific onboarding program, we find. And the challenge with that is that where somebody is, if you, let me just draw this out in people's minds. If you think about an X and a Y axis, and you draw the X axis about from the X and Y point, and you go over to the right about an inch, put one year, another inch to the right 2 years, another inch to the right 3 years. That's timing. And then on the Y axis, that's really what I would call someone's competence and commitment in their job. Okay. If you put a pencil down at that XY target and move it about 45 degrees, and you draw a line there, okay, and then you shift that pencil from 45 maybe down to a 15-degree angle, there's going to be a gap between the 45-degree angle and the 20 at the 1 year mark. If you imagine that gap, that's the gap that's going to continue to be the gap if you draw out to year 2 and year 3. So here's my point. Where somebody is at in their role in regards to commitment and competency at year 1 is where that's going to be in year 3. And that gap is huge. Wow. So the importance of having a well-developed onboarding program is key. If you do an assessment, and we do what we call candidate assessments, and we're going to find out their level of commitment, their desire. We're going to learn out there. We're going to study 21 tactical competencies like consultative selling and qualifying and closing. You're going to get to know a lot about your person. Put that in use in regards to your onboarding program. And then the second thing, make sure that you have a mentor alongside that person. It's one thing to have a boss, but isn't it nice to have a colleague that's responsible to you, for you and to you?
Absolutely.
So we find that organizations that have a mentor that's tied to that person, their success rate more than doubles. Something like you said, it's so simple, but we sometimes just forget about the simplicity that can be so effective.
Yeah, it really can. And I think a mentor can really help identify gaps a lot easier than their direct supervisor can as well. And so I think it really helps to, take a team approach to onboarding or a new hire.
Yeah.
I know that's something we do at Charles Aris, and it definitely makes a difference. So that's a great point for sure. Last question, and then I'm going to move on to kind of the fun speed round. But I'd love to get your take about how companies should think about succession planning, because that's a huge, topic in ag in general, but just from your perspective and some of these, sales organizations, how should they go about succession?
Seems like many organizations that I work with, they'll ask me that. They'll say, we know it's important. And I'll ask them, well, what does poor sales succession cost you? And they're like, what do you mean? Well, when you study when a great performer leaves his or her territory, on average, what happens to customer retention? What happens to customer acquisition, and what happens to sales? The organizations I work with, over the last 6 years that we've studied this, when they have a high performer that needs to be replaced, whether they're moving up to the company or leaving, retiring, there's a $1.8 million loss in revenue in year 1 after replacing that person. So it's a big deal. Hopefully I've caused some people to think, yeah, we maybe need to study that as well in our company. After you've studied it, it's going to make it a huge priority. We find that the world-class organizations do a few things. And the first thing they do is they make sure that they have ample time in knowing that this person, if they're going to retire or they're going to move to another role, that they have ample time to find a replacement, and that replacement can be mentored by that person in the field or wherever role they might have. So if you have time to do that, that's great. Second thing is build a bench. I think a lot of organizations, just the just-in-time hire. You think you're saving money in regards, well, we'll just wait to hire people until we need them. The ramp-up time for an average salesperson is between 12 and 18 months. And you think about the cost of that, Kacey, to an organization. So give yourself some time and have a bench. And then the third thing that we encourage people to do in succession planning is to specifically write down what a good job looks like. In the Situational Leadership by Ken Blanchard, which we just absolutely promote because we think it's a world-class structure in regards to leading servant leadership. One of the best things Ken talks about is if you ask your managers what a good job looks like, if they can't write it down, that's an issue. So in succession planning, what does a good job look like? And are we hiring characteristics in a new person to fit the characteristics that are going to be needed? It's a big deal. The cost of poor sales succession planning or management succession planning is much bigger than most people ever think.
Yeah, I was just going to say I'm very taken back by that 8 million number. That's a lot. That can be, catastrophic within an organization. And your point too about the 12 to 18 month ramp up time. Companies don't have that. They have 3 to 6 months right now, and those are the expectations too. So there's a lot of pressure around these roles to ramp up really quickly, but it's challenging. So yeah, I think succession and just building that bench and it all comes together, having a good onboarding program, having that mentor, it really leads the way to build a good succession program. So it's definitely all tied together.
It was working well when the economy was on fire and sales seemed to just be coming, right? And a lot of these problems and issues were covered up by that, and now they're being exposed, by the commodity markets and the business, just the economy is the way it is right now. Those things are being exposed. And so I think it's really important that organizations work with an organization and someone like you, Kacey, that can attract talent that's known and that can speed up that onboarding process.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they can hire people like you, David, to train them the right way. So dynamic duo over here.
That's right.
Awesome. So I'm going to move into the speed round, and a couple of these questions I'm really curious about. So the first one is, what is your favorite book?
You think about the different seasons that you're in. Sometimes everything's going well, and when things are going well, I like to look at really any sales book. Spin Selling is a great book in regards to consultative selling. Many times, I think the season that a lot of organizations are in right now in regards to just getting really tuned in to being a great manager is Coaching Salespeople into Champions. And it's by Keith Rosen. Keith does a great job of really outlining steps in regards to coaching great salespeople. And then I mentioned it before, Ken Blanchard. A lot of times people say, I don't have time to read a book, but it's one of the most important things you'll do, because when you stop learning as a manager, many times your organization stops doing. So Blanchard wrote a book, Simple Truths of Leadership. It's a quick read. I mean, you can have this book done in 90 minutes, and you'll highlight things and you're always going to go back to it. And then the final book, I know you just said one book, but I talked about the seasons. Our mission at All Terrain is to come alongside every person that we meet and help them pull out their full potential that God's given them, so that they can leave a lasting legacy in their name for their friends, family, and community. So building legacies is what we do. And there's a great book called The Legacy Builder by Rod Olson. And it's another, it's an easy read. You'll have that read in, an easy afternoon, but you're going to come away from it with a lot of reflection in regards to, what do I want to do in building a legacy? So those would be the books I'd recommend.
Awesome. Those are great. I'm definitely writing those down. What is your go-to productivity hack?
How about AI?
Yes.
Boy, it's amazing, how short a time sometimes you have, and you just need a a simple answer. I found that AI is certainly it's the hot topic, right? It's really big. But then, to just be more maybe on a more serious tone, my go-to hack is to get started. I think a
Yeah,
lot of people, I think today, maybe they're unsure of themselves, not quite sure to start, and time just ticks away. Just get started. Just get started.
I love that. I love that. That needs to be on a mug. Just get started. You need to trademark that. Okay, a couple more. If you weren't in your current role, what would you do?
I think today what I would probably be doing is trying to get to our youth. And I think
Mm.
society today, I think youth are really looking for role models. They're looking for a voice. They're looking for somebody to mentor them. And so, we try in our spare time to give back. And so I think young people would be where I would invest my time.
That's a great use of time. I love that. What is one leadership trait you value the most?
I would say my favorite specific leadership characteristic is modeling the way. I think as moms and dads and aunts and uncles and brothers, and if you're a manager, whatever it might be, a colleague, people are watching you. So what are you modeling? What are you modeling and how you overcome adversity? What are you modeling when it comes to when you have success? Do you get complacent? What are you modeling in regard to, how you come along people that are having issues? So modeling, if I had one, that would be the one, Kacey.
I like that. Another phrase to trademark. Last question. What is one piece of advice you'd give to your younger self?
Belief. When I speak to organizations, I talk about that the devil's real, and the devil's job is to destroy your potential, and you only have one life in regards to really reaching your full potential. And I think there were moments in my life that I said I wasn't ready, I wasn't smart enough, I had all the excuses, and I think it's really important that you believe in yourself. And so if you ever have doubts, don't do what I did and believe in that self-doubt for, 5, 6, 7, 8 years of my life where I wasn't quite sure I was ready. You're
Mhm.
ready. Just get started.
Yep, absolutely. Well, this has been really great, David, and you've given me personally a great deal to ponder and reflect on. And so I have no doubt that our listeners are going to, come away from this and find a lot of value. So I just want to thank you again for joining me today and just sharing your insights. And also, too, just a little plug if listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way to find you?
Email at David at allterrain ready, ALTERRAIN ready, READY.com. So it's David at allterrainready.com. That would be the best place. Or you can go to allterrainready.com. And but those are the two places to get us. I've enjoyed working with you, Kacey. I wish you the very best. There's such a need for what you're doing and your organization is doing in regards to placing and attracting talent. So best wishes to you.
Thank you so much. And I would echo the same for you. So I really appreciate that. And so, well, we invite listeners to tune into our other podcasts for our Charles Aris Executive Search podcast. Again, I'm Kacey Toews with Charles Aris, and you can find us on the web at charlesaris.com. Thanks so much.
Thanks for tuning in to the Charles Aris podcast. For more insights and resources, visit us at www.charlesaris.com. We'll see you next time.